and then move us through a bit this morning. Since part of it is a Gadita, it should help us move along fairly smoothly, all right? So, giving our sponsors, Dr. Paul, Year of Learning, Dr. Paul Koningsberg, in memory of his brother, Dr. Sam Koningsberg, Shimon Reuven ben Levish, and Ed Goldberg's cousin, Nisan Hara Nisan ben Fardosa. Paula and Bob Romberg, in memory of their dear friend, Julian Smith, Yehuda ben Yisrael. Malka Mann, in memory of her family murdered in the Holocaust. Harav Tzvi Hirsch ben Shlomo Yaakov, Sarah bat Ephraim, Yisrael David ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Ephraim ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Adia bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Miriam bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Pesel bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shalom ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shlomo Yaakov ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shmuel ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch. Okay, still continuing a year of learning. The many friends of Dr. Marvin Blush, Moshe Shalom ben Yitzchak Halevi, friends of Toby Peres, Sarah Tova bat Yisrael Dov, friends of Malka Levi, Malka bat Yosef, friends of Avi Gitler, Avram Meir ben Shimon, Cheryl Sher, her children and grandchildren, in memory of her uncle, founding member of BRS, Dr. Israel Brook, Yisrael ben Harav Akiva. A month of learning by Lynn Rappaport, in memory of her husband, Avram ben Sion HaKohen. A week of learning by Minnie Shavrik, and that is in memory of her father, Yechiel Yaakov ben Meshulam Nissen. Also a week of learning by Ron and Susan Podolsky, in memory of her father, Tzvi ben Pinchas. Also, this past Shabbos was a day of learning by Milton and Tamar Fishberger, in memory of his father, Chaim ben David. May the Neshamas have an Aliyah, Krank Rafia, Velti Yeshir Hashem Atzliah, and L'chol B'nai Yisrael, a good Geben Shtiar. Okay? All right. Now, according to the schedule, today we should be starting 64, right? But I'm actually going to have us go back. We'll start actually in the bottom of Samach Gimel Amud Beis. Okay? All right, we saw the Gemara there was coming back to our subject of Erev Chatzeros or Erev Mabui. Okay? And we saw this whole back and forth. Abai, one and this and another, and back and forth in terms of raising different questions about the situation. Okay? So towards the bottom of the Amud, okay, we see just, okay, the Gemara then says Amrule, about 4 or 5 lines from the bottom. Okay? Right? So in other words, clearly trying to tell us that usually a lone Jew does not live in the same courtyard as a Gentile. Okay? Right? So here the Gemara says Amrule, but they said to him, right? Midehu ta'ama. Okay? The reason is that it doesn't restrict a Jew, a single Jew. Right? Ela delo shchiche dedaire, says the Gemara. Why? Because Jews don't usually live alone in a courtyard with Gentiles, at least apparently back there in Babylonia. Okay? Vahacha hakadaire. But here we say, they are living together, okay? Because sometimes more than one Jew will live in the same courtyard with the Gentile. Amar laho, kol betulei rishutayu, Gabi chad milta de lo shchichahi. Okay? Abaye's answer is that the rights of the individual Jew are not given up in that situation. It's an unusual occurrence, right? Umilta de lo shchicha, lo gazru barabanan. And something that wasn't common, or usually the case, the rabbis tended not to make a decree. So Gemara now is going to bring us another objection to Abaye's perspective, right? And that's going to lead us on to our daf for today. Okay. Azal Rav Huna, Bered the Rav Yoshua. Okay. So what happens? Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yoshua, went, right? Amra l'shma'ate, kame de Rabba. And he went and repeated this particular lesson before Rabbah, right? In other words, the lesson, the explanation that Abaye had given. Amarle. And Rabbah then says to him, as we continue now on Samach Daled. Here's Ted. Good morning. Okay? Right? What happens? Im kain bitalt Torat iruv me'otom abui. If that's the case, he says, then you have totally nullified, removed the practice, the status, right, of Eruv Shituf Mabuot from that particular alleyway. So the answer that he gives him then is, in return, the Ma'arve. So let them go ahead and make an Eruv there, and shouldn't that be all right? Okay? So the problem, Rava then responds, Yomru Eruv Mo'el b'makom nachri, that people will therefore say that even when you have the Gentile as part of the residence of the Chatzer, okay, and we've said that all need to participate in order to make a joint household for the Shituf Mabuot or the Eruv Chatzerot. Okay, they would say, people would start talking and say, well, even if there's a non-Jew there, the Eruv will still work. Okay, Demachrizinan. Okay, so his answer is, again, so let them make an announcement. And Rava comes back and says, Achrizata l'dardake. Okay, you're going to make an announcement for generations, for the children. In other words, how will future generations know? Okay, that may work out at that moment, but in the future, people will hear about it and they'll say, oh, well, such and such. Ela Amar Rava. But rather, Rava says as follows, and he's going to give us a different approach. Lizil chad minayhu lekarevle. Let one of the Jews who live in the Chatzer become acquainted and become familiar or friendly with the non-Jew. V'lish omine duchta. And let him go and ask a particular spot. In other words, part of the area of the Chatzer that belongs to the Gentile. V'linach be'midei. And let him put some object there. Dahavele kischiro v'lekito. And in that way, the Jew will become like either a hired laborer or like a harvester for the Gentile. V'amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. And Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, Afilu schiro v'afilu lekito. Even the Gentile's worker, hired worker, or his harvester, notain eruvo udio, can make a eruv as a Jew working for the Gentile, can make an eruv for that individual, and that's sufficient. Okay. Now, Amar le Abaye. So Abaye, however, okay, is bothered by this suggestion. And he goes ahead and he raises a question to their teacher, Rav Yosef. He says, maybe that might work when you have a single Jew as the harvester or the laborer or something. However, says Abaye, Hayu sham chamisha schiro, v'chamisha lekito. Let's say there were multiple Jews working for the Gentile, 5 Jews or 5 harvesters, okay? And they all don't they all have to be part of the Eruv Chatzerot? All of them? And if one of them doesn't participate, that's going to be Oser, that's going to prohibit any other Jew, not only those others that work for the Gentile, but any of the other Jews who live off that same Chatzer from utilizing it. Okay? Amarle, Rav Yosef responds to him, Imamru schiro lekito lahakel. If they said that, in other words, if the sages said that it could be a worker, a laborer, or a harvester, and that was done for purposes of leniency, Yomru schiro lekito lahachmir, would they say that for that same purpose of that individual, that laborer or that harvester, that this is a stringency? And remember, we've always said, Eruv Tchumim, okay, right? But particularly not so much Eruv Tchumim, but certainly Eruvei Chatzerot, okay, is the Rabbanan. And we always paskin the Rabbanan here, the Kula. Okay? Now, having said this, we come back now to this ruling that Shmuel gave on this issue. Gufa. Let's come back, says the text. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. It says Rav Yehuda in the name of Shmuel, Afilu schiro, va'afilu lekito. Even his hired laborer, even the harvester. Notein eruvo udio. Okay? That it's sufficient, that if he puts his share in the eruv, that's adequate. Amar Rav Nachman, says Rav Nachman, Kama ma'alya hashma'ata. How significant, how beautiful is this particular statement? Now, we don't know the tone that Rav Nachman made that statement. And that's what the Mefarshim, okay, have a problem with. We don't know if he said that as a positive statement, or we don't know if he made that as a critical statement, okay? Because if it was a critical statement, what business does he have to say this particular statement of halacha is good, and another statement of halacha is not advantageous, is not beautiful, is not excellent? So that's problematic, okay? Rav Nachman's statement. So Gemara continues. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. This is Rav Yehuda in the name of Shmuel. Okay? Now we're going to sort of raise a whole separate issue. But we're going
Rabbi,
yes.
I'm lost. Where are we?
Okay. All right. We are about 13, 14 lines down on Samach Daled Amud Aleph.
Oh, okay.
Okay? All right.
I was way longer than I thought it was. Okay.
Okay.
Thank
So
you.
Rav Yehuda says now in the name of Shmuel. Okay. Now this may seem to be a tangential issue, but the Gemara ultimately, while it's immediately tangential, okay, is going to lead back into this issue of whether or not it's appropriate to comment on whether a particular halacha is good or bad. but it also leads us to a new topic. Okay, and that topic is intoxication. Okay? So as follows. Shata revi'it yayin. If someone drank a revi'is of yayin, al yoreh, he is not permitted to teach. In other words, to rule halachically. Amar Rav Nachman. Now, here comes back same Rav Nachman. Lo ma'alya hashma'ata. This lesson is not beautiful, is not good. So in other words, here we see now that based this story, on one hand, Rav Nachman comments positively, in another case, he comments negatively on halacha. Daha ana kol kama delo shatina revi'iyata dechama. He says, because as for me, so long as I haven't drunk at least a shot or two in the morning of wine, lo tzila da'atai, my mind isn't clear. Okay? Like those guys, like to have their kiddush every morning, a little schnapps to start the day. Right? Okay, so what happens? Amar le Rava, so as Rava says, as follows in response, Mai Tama, what's the reasoning? Amar Mar, Hachi Amar. Okay, why? Because here the master has said as follows, right? Right, so Amar Mar, Hachi Amar, was it not this, was said, Rav Acha Bar Chanina, by Rabbi Acha Bar Chanina, Mai Dichtiv, what does it mean when we cite a pasuk that says, V'ro'ez zonot yoved hon, that the pasuk says, one who becomes a friend of prostitutes will lose his wealth. And notice the word zonot is in plural, okay? And so he uses a play on that word. Kol ha'omer shmua zo no'eh v'zo eina no'eh. Whoever says this lesson is a pleasant lesson, and this lesson is not a pleasant lesson, ma'abed hona shel Torah, is going to lose the wealth of his Torah study. So it's clearly a criticism of Rav Nachman having said one halacha is good and one is not beneficial. Now, since the Gemara touched tangentially on this issue of drinking, of intoxication, okay, and the statement that right, that Rav Nachman's attitude, the Gemara going to continue on this motif. Okay, Amar le Hadrebe. Rav Nachman says, I recant my statement. Now, Amar Rabba bar Rav Huna. So the Gemara continues now. Rabba bar Huna says, Shatui al yitpalel. One who has had a drink should not pray. Ve'im hitpalel, but if he did pray, tfilato tfilah, then his prayer is a valid prayer. Shikur, one who is really intoxicated, al yitpalel, should not pray. Ve'im hitpalel, tfilato to'ava, and if he prays, his prayer is an abomination. Hechidami shatui, vehechidami shikur. How do we know what the difference is between someone who is slightly drunk and somebody who's indeed intoxicated? Kiha, the Rabbi Abba bar Shomaini, the Rab Menashe bar Yirmiyah, Agmi Gifti. Okay? As was said by the following two rabbis, Havu kam iftare mehadade, Ma'abra denahar yufte. Okay, as was said by these two colleagues, okay, who were meeting at the bridge or at the ford of the river Difte. They were separating, okay, going different paths perhaps. Havu kamafte bahadade, amabra denahayufte. Amru, and they said, Kol chad minan lema milta delo shamia lechavre. Let each one of us say a drasha, a halacha that has not been learned by the other. Da'amar Mari bar Rav Huna, as was said by Mari bar Rav Huna, lo yipater adam mechavero ela mitoch davar halacha. Okay, shemitoch kach zochro, that a person should not depart from his colleague, from his friend, without saying a word of law, a word of halacha, by which his friend will remember him. Okay. Patach chad v'amar, one of them began and said, Hechidami shatui, behechidami shikur. How do we know what one is that is slightly drunk and one that is completely intoxicated? Shatui, one that is slightly drunk, kol sheyachol ledaber lifnei hamelech. He is one who is still able to speak before the king. In other words, maybe he's able to put words together, even if he's slightly inebriated. Shikur, kol she'eno yachol ledaber lifnei hamelech. But one who is totally intoxicated, he is not able to speak before the king. In other words, he does not have, can't even put his words together, can't speak, he can't reason, things like that.
Is this king, or is this talking about tefillah and talking to Hashem?
Well, good question. It really could be either.
Either one, huh?
Okay? The implication, okay? In other words, somebody of authority. Okay? Patach idach, the other one began and said, Va'amar, hamachazik benichse hager. One who has a chazaka, okay, where a convert had died, and therefore there is no heir to the convert, and one then who is able to acquire that property, right? Ma ya'aseh v'yitkaimu biyado. What should he do so that those possessions are not only rightfully his, but he's able to maintain them? Yikach behen sefer Torah. He should do a mitzvah with that money, and for example, buy a sefer Torah with it. Okay? Amar Rav Sheshet, says Rav Sheshet, afilu, okay, ba'al nichse ishto. Okay, even a husband with the money that he acquires from his from the dowry when he marries his wife. That's newfound wealth, newfound possessions, and therefore here too he should do a mitzvah with it. Rabba Amar, says Rabba, afilu avad iska v'reva. Says Rabba, even if somebody earned money through business and he made a considerable profit, okay, he should use that, at least part of that money, for a mitzvah purpose. Now, Rav Papa Amar, afilu matzah mitziyah. Says Rav Papa, even if he found a lost object, and in order to keep the object, he should at least do something of a mitzvah. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. And he says, afilu katav bahot tefillin. Even if it was a smaller mitzvah, as having tefillin written, or boxes made for tefillin. Va'amar Rav Chanin, ve'itema Rabbi Chanina, and others say it was Rabbi Chanina. Ma'i kara'ah, on what basis might we say that they had a pasuk to base this on? Dichtiv vayidor Yisrael neder v'gomer. Okay, namely that Israel declared a vow. Okay, in other words, you take the vow and you perform some sort of a mitzvah. Okay, having said this now, we come back to that motif about the issue of drinking. Okay? Amar Rami Bar Abba. He says, what happens if a person drank a certain amount of wine? How do you get over that initial lightheadedness or inebriation? Darach mil, he should walk a mile, basically. Vishina, okay, and or sleep. Kol shahu, a certain amount. Mefigin et hayayin, and that dispels, it dissipates the effects of the wine. Amar Rav Nachman, says Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba Bar Abuha, in the name of Rabbi Bar Abuha, Lo Shanu Ele Sheshata Kadei Revi'it. That's only if he just drank, let's say, a revis, okay, a large shot glass, right? Whatever. Aval Shata Yoter Revi'it. But if he drank more than a revis, Kol Shekain Shadarach. How much more, okay, should he then walk? Torah to toe. But that becomes more difficult for him, more of a difficulty, right? Vishina, and if he tries sleeping then, miskarto, that makes him even more sleepy and makes him more, increases his drunkenness. So now Gemara comes back. V'darach mil mefiga hayayin. Do we say that walking let's say roughly a mile, a distance, is going to dissipate the wine? Vahatanya. But aren't we taught in the Braita the following, right? And here we get to part of the Gadata. Ma'aseh b'Rabban Gamliel, shahaya rochev al hachamor. There was an incident one time when Rabban Gamliel was riding on a donkey, v'haya mahalech me'ako l'chsiv, and he was traveling from Akko to Achziv, okay, a certain distance. V'haya Rabbi Eli mahalech acharav, and he was accompanied, okay, by Rabbi Eli, okay, traveling behind him, right? What happened? As they're traveling along the road, matzah gluskin b'derech, they found loaves of bread along the road. Amar lo Eli, and he said to Eli, Tol gluskain min haderech, pick up those loaves of bread, okay, that we find on the road. Matzah nachri, they came and they met a Gentile, achad, a certain Gentile. Amar lo, and he said to the Gentile, Mavgai, Tol gluskin halalu me Eli. Mavgai was the name of the Gentile. Come and take these loaves from Eli. Okay. What happens, says the Gemara in the Braita? Nitpal lo Rabbi Eli. Rabbi Eli approached him, and he said to the Gentile, Amar lo, mehechan ata, where are you coming from? Amar lo, me'ayarot shel burganin. I'm coming from a village of guard huts. So he was a guardsman, a Gentile guardsman. Okay. Uma shimcha, and what's your name? Mavgai Shmaini. My name happens to be Mavgai. Okay. So the Gemara says that Eli then asked him, Klum hikircha Rabban Gamliel me'olam. Did Rabban Gamliel ever make your acquaintance, familiar with you before? Amar lo, love. He said no. Ba'ota sha'a lamadnu shekivein Rabban Gamliel baruach hakodesh. At that same moment, we learned that, let's say, divine presence, okay, was divine inspiration, helped Rabban Gamliel determine the name of this Gentile. And the Gemara continues, Ushlosha dvarim lamadnu ba'ota sha'a. And there are three things that we learned at that very same time. Number one, lamadnu she'ein ma'avirin al ha'ochlin. We learned the first that we don't pass by food left on the ground and leave it there. Number 2, v'lamadnu sheholchim acharei rov ovrei drachim. Okay, again we learn that this case, right, that we follow the majority of the travelers on the road. Okay, since we say that the majority of travelers are Gentiles, right? So therefore what happens? We assume that the bread must have belonged to Gentiles. Number 3, Ulamadnu shechamtso shel nachri achar haPesach, that this bread that may be found, for example, after Pesach, okay, and therefore belongs to Gentiles. Okay, what's the status of it for Jews? Mutar bahana'a, that it's permissible for a Jew still to get benefit from it. Why? Because by returning it to the Gentile, okay, he's doing a favor for the Gentile, and in that way, the Gentile might actually return the favor at some point. Kevan shehegia l'kziv, the Braita continues, once they reach their destination of Achziv, ba'achad l'sha'al al nidro, it came an individual to Rabban Gamliel to ask to be released from a vow. Okay, Amar le zeh she'imo, Rabban Gamliel said to the one who was traveling with him, namely Rabbi Eli, Klum shatinu revi'it yayin ha'italki, didn't we drink a certain amount of Italian wine? Okay. Amar lohen, he said to him, yes. Im kain yitayel acharenu ad sheyafig yainenu. If that's the case, let the individual follow and walk behind us until we've been dissipated by the wine, until the wine has dissipated from us. V'tiyel achareihem shlosh milim, and the individual walked behind them 3 mil. Okay. Ad shehigia l'suma shel tzur, until they reached a certain area, which were rocky heights, and that was known as the Ladder of Tyre, okay, further up on the coast. Okay. Now, kevan shehigia l'suma d'tzur, once they reached these rocky heights, the area of Ladder of Tyre, yarad Rabban Gamliel min hachamor, Rabban Gamliel got off the donkey, v'nitatef, and he wrapped himself in his talit, or his cloak, right? Right? In other words, he was prepared now to show his respect for the Shekhinah, because he was going to have to act in a halachic manner to exempt this person from the vow. V'yashav, he sat down. V'hitirlo nidro, and he permitted, in other words, he nullified the vow of the individual. And so the Gemara continues to tell us in regards to this Braita. V'harbe dvarim lamadnu ba'ota sha'a. And there were many things that we learned at that same time. Number 1, lamadnu sherevi'it yayin ha'atalki mishaker. Okay, we learned that the Italian wine particularly renders one inebriated. Okay. Number 2, v'lamadnu shikur al yoreh, and we learned that somebody who has drunk, okay, intoxicating beverages cannot rule on halachic decisions. Number 3, v'lamadnu shederech mefiga et hayayin, and we learned that walking some distance helps dissipate the wine. Number 4, v'lamadnu she'ein mefirin nidarim, and we learned that one does not nullify vows, lo rechov, not while riding, v'lo mahalech, and not while walking, v'lo omed, and not while standing, ela yoshev, but seated. So the Gemara raises the question, ukatani mihat shlosha milim. But nevertheless, the Braita taught that it said they went 3 meal. So the Gemara answers, Shani yayin ha'italki, the mishtakeh tfei. Italian wine is different because it renders one more inebriated. Gemara continues. V'amar Rav Nachman. Didn't Rav Nachman say, Amar Rabba bar Abuha, in the name of Rabba Abuha, Lo shanu ele sheshata revi'it, that they said this only applied if one simply drank a revi'is. Aval shata yoter revi'is, but if he drank more than a revi'is, kol shakein darach taradato. How much more so then isn't his walking going to be an exertion and more difficult for him? Vishina miskarto, and sleep is going to make him more tired and more sleepy, more intoxicated. So Gemara answers, Rechov Shani, riding is different. Hashta da'atit lahachi. Okay, now he says that you've arrived to this conclusion. L'Rami bar Abba, nami lo kasha. For Rami bar Abba, there's also not a problem. Why? Rechov shani, any, riding, okay, is different. Is that really the case? V'ha'amar Rav Nachman. But didn't Rav Nachman say, Meferin nidarin, bein mahalach, bein omed, uvein rechov? That according to Rav Nachman, one may nullify vows, whether one is walking, whether standing, or riding. Tanaihi, this is a machloket tanaim. De'ikalaman da'amar potchin becharata, because there are those who say that in order to nullify the person's vow, we must express some kind of regret. Ve'ikalaman da'amar ein potchin becharata. And there are others who disagree and say one does not have to express regret at saying the vow initially. The Amar Rabba bar Chana, as was said by Rabba bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, okay, the following, all right, namely, my patachle Rabban Gamliel lahahu gavra. Okay, how was it that Rabban Gamliel was capable of opening, is our text, but in other words, of dissolving, removing the vow of that particular person? Okay, he cites a pasuk, Yesh boteh kimidkarot cherav. There are those who speak, and their language is like thrusts of a sword. V'lashon chachamim mirapeh. But the language of the sages is curative. It heals. Kol haboteh, anyone who speaks, okay? In other words, a person who makes a vow without realizing its significance and importance and its implications, ra'ui l'dokro b'cherev. It's as if it's worthy to stab him, right, with a knife, with a sword. He deserves to be pierced with a sword, okay, for making inappropriate vows. Elesh lashon chachamim merapeh. But rather the language of sages is healing. Amar mar, and the master also says elsewhere, ve'en the Braita, ve'en ma'avirin al ha'ochlim. We learned that he said that one doesn't pass by bread, by foodstuffs. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, says Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, Lo shanu ela b'dorot harishonim. They only taught this, he said, really in regards to earlier generations, right? Namely, what do we mean by early generations? She'ein benot Yisrael prutzot b'kshafi. Okay, that young Jewish women, okay, were not involved in any kind of sorcery. Okay, in other words, the concern was, okay, that the people would use loaves of bread, okay, as a way of putting a spell on someone, okay? Because if you picked up the loaf of bread and it became your property, whatever spell they felt was associated with that loaf would then fall on that person. Aval b'dorot ha'achronim shebenot Yisrael prutzot b'kshafim. Okay? But when later generations, when Jewish women, young Jewish girls, were more, I don't want to use the word open, okay, because prutza here is, were more, either they became, the difference of the Mefarshim. Some said that they were more susceptible to magic. Others say that they were more involved themselves in magic, ma'avirin, then they can pass by these loaves of bread. So Gemara continues, Tana shlemin ma'avirin, petitin ein ma'avirin. Tana taught that it was full loaves that they would pass by, but slices they would not pass by. Amar le Rav Asi, the Rav Ashi, and so Rav Asi raises a question to Rav Ashi, Va'aptitin lo avdan, and on pieces of bread they did not do those things. In other words, they did not make any kind of magic spells. V'haktiv, but wasn't it written in a pasuk? V'tichalalena oti al ani b'sha'alei she'urim b'petuchei lechem d'shakle ba'agraihu. Okay? Namely that, didn't we see, you desecrate me before a nation with handfuls of barley and pieces of bread, p'tutei lechem. The answer is, says the Gemara, d'shakle ba'agraihu. That in other words, that they took those pieces of bread as their wages, as payment, okay, for their act. And therefore, that's why they would not put spells on the pieces of bread. Now let's going to continue a bit. Amar Rav Sheshet, Mishum Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah. Okay, Rav Sheshet said the name of Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah. We're going to go on a bit here on to Samach Hey, so I can catch you guys a little ahead because of my being away. Okay? Yichol ani liftor et kol ha'olam kulo min hadin miyom shecharav beit hamikdash va'ad achshav. Okay? So what happens? Rav Sheshet says in the name of Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, it's possible that I can exempt all Jews, okay, from any kind of punishment, any kind of judgment, from the time that the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed until now. Okay? Shnei Amar is based on a pasuk, Lochein Shim'ina Zot Aniyah Ushchorat V'lo Miyayim. Okay? Listen now, poor one who's drunk, but not from wine. Okay? In other words, the implication being that the Jewish people were so, as a result of the destruction of the temple, they're like in a state of intoxication, okay? That they are not always sure responsible for their deeds, okay? Meitive. But the Gemara says, we challenge this with the following braita. Shikur mekcho mekach. Somebody who is drunk, his purchase is a valid purchase. Umemkaro memkar, and his sale is a valid sale. Avad avera sheyesh b'mita, var avera, if he performed a transgression where the punishment is the death penalty, memitinoto, we put him to death. Malkot, if he performed a transgression where flogging, lashes is the punishment, malkinoto, we punish him with malchus. Klalo shel davar, the general principle then, harehu kepikeach l'chol dvarav, he is considered like he is aware, okay? His judgment is clear for all things. Ele shepatur min hatfila, but he is exempt, okay, from davening. Okay. Now, my yicholani liftor. So then, what did Rav Sheshet mean when he said that it's possible for him to exempt somebody? The ka'amar nami midin tefillah. It's possible that he also said that he was going to be exempting him from the requirement, the practice of prayer. Amal Rabbi Chanina, and Rabbi Chanina says as follows, namely, Lo shana ela shelo higia l'shakruto shalot, that they only taught this only if somebody reached the level of inebriation of Lot. Aval higia l'shakruto shalot patur mikulam. But if he reached the level of inebriation of Lot, he is exempt from all. In other words, from all kinds of obligations. Okay, that much. If he's that inebriated, he's considered like a fool, right? Okay. Now I think that leaves us a place to stop. All right, and we'll pick up tomorrow there on Samach Hay, all right, about those lines down at that point, okay?
Very good.
All right, and again, tomorrow I'll try to, if it's more agadita, we can move a little faster. We'll cover as much as we can. Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right, guys, have a good day. Everybody stay well. I see Erwin didn't get on this morning. Hope everything's okay.
Yeah, he was in shul.
Yeah. All right, take care.
So the time is 8:30?
8:30, yeah. It was good that we said today 8:30 because we had Torah reading, and that was still without long tachanun. Okay?
Right.
All right, guys, take care.
30.